just for the record, so that the recording is still going, it's approximately 8:33. We've lost the streaming capability. The staff's working on that. All right, Chief Hall, let's see, just received word we're back to streaming again so the public can hear it. So would you start over, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor and Council. Good evening. This is Tim Carlson, the Chief of Police for the City of Westminster. Wanted to give you a brief update on kind of some of the policing impacts that this COVID-19 has had in our department and across our city. So I'll just give you a few highlights, and I wanted to focus really on when this whole thing began. We were very conscious of some of the activities we needed to do as a police department in our community. We committed to a very high visibility in our community of uniformed officers, which we have adjusted our staffing to ensure that that happens. Second, a very strong focus on public order and stability. Third, focus on our retail locations that were still open, our hotels and our hospital centers. And we focus significantly on those. We stay in contact with them on an almost daily basis, identifying issues of thefts and so forth, and how we can assist them, and also supply chain safety, ensuring that the supply chains that goes to those stores is uninterrupted. And then finally, even though we've asked our officers to reduce some of their self-initiated contacts on the street for their own safety and reduce their exposure, we also have focused on unfortunately, some of the really egregious driving behaviors that we're seeing as the roads are a little more open than they were before. And so we've made a concentrated effort in that realm as well. As far as some of the numbers and the impact, it's been kind of interesting to see. Our calls for service, we generate anywhere between 8,000 and 10,000 calls for service every month that come into our dispatch center. We're maintaining about that same call load. It may be even a little up since January of this year compared to January of last year. Having said that, the number of case reports or criminal reports that we're taking is actually down significantly from January of this year. We started a decrease in the amount of actual criminal reports that we were taking from January, and that decreased after the stay in place order was instituted in late March. So we're down probably 14 to 15% in our actual criminal case reports for the year. And specifically, it's been kind of interesting to watch some of the crime trends in our community. We've had a significant decrease in some of the areas that we were concerned about, decrease significant by almost over 70% in some of these calls for service from the day that the stay in place order was issued until today. Those areas of decrease in disturbances, people drunk on the streets causing problems, domestic violence is down actually almost 70%. We have not seen an increase in any of the mental health holds that we do for folks who are struggling. And so a lot of those areas are actually down significantly in our crime reporting. In addition, some of the criminal issues that we've seen a reduction of 15% in burglaries, both residential and business burglaries. Again, in a category that we were not sure what that would look like going into this, but we've seen almost a 15% decrease in that. And finally, some of the trends that we've seen an increase in relate mostly to motor vehicles. That is, whether it be trespasses to motor vehicles, in other words, vehicles that are parked and unattended and somebody breaks in and steals something from them. We've seen a significant increase in that, as well as motor vehicle thefts themselves. And we've seen an increase in that by almost 30% in the time that we've had the stay in place order. And the other area that has gone up is theft. Not surprising as it relates to some of our retail areas, and we've been in constant communication with them and helping them and reducing their losses and what they're seeing, and we've had some great success there. So those are just some highlights of some of the patterns and so forth that we've seen that I wanted to bring to your attention tonight.
Thank you, Chief. I know that we've had the issue, and some of this discussion has been around that not every one of our neighbors has had the luxury of seeing calls go down. I know two of our cities' neighbors reported that they had seen a significant increase in domestic violence cases. So I'm really glad to see that our city has not incurred that. Ms. Seitz, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief Carlson. I do have a question, and it is somewhat related to what the mayor just spoke up. I'd been on a call with another community and had heard, similar to the mayor, that their domestic violence was up. Do we think ours is, I'm delighted to hear it is down by 70%. That is wonderful news. However, do we think that that is perhaps somewhat inflated, the reduction, because people are maybe less likely to report right now as they don't want to enter into the whole judicial and legal system? Do you have thoughts on that?
I think that could be. I wish I had a better answer for you. There, of course, in domestic situations, there's all kinds of factors that are in play. They're highly emotional and intimate, obviously, and so yeah, that could be an explanation for that. I will tell you that in speaking with some of the agencies, at least on the Jefferson County side, some have seen an increase in that area. Some have seen zero increase or decrease. It's very interesting. Each community is unique, and it was very interesting listening to some of those agencies describe some of the things that they're seeing. As I mentioned, some of it has been in the area of domestic violence. But as far as our reports go and what people are reporting to us and what we're intervening in this period from March 23rd to today, we've shown a significant decrease in that area.
Well, that is good news, and I hope it proves out to be not just lack of reporting, but truly people are coming together. My second question has to do with some of those acute mental health care calls. I believe I just understood you to say that we have not seen an increase in those either. Is that correct?
I should clarify that a little better. The calls for service may indicate that we're going out on a lot more circumstances where people may be experiencing mental health. I don't know if crisis is the right word, but a mental health issue. But what I was referring to specifically is our number of mandatory holds that we put on people who have reached a point where they're a danger to themselves or others. And those have not increased. And that was the number I was actually referring to. Those calls for service could come in a variety of different ways. They could come in as a disturbance. They could come in as a unwanted person. They can come in as a suspicious person or things like that. So it's really tough to get a grasp on where those mental health issues come into calls for service, unless they get to the place where we actually do a mental health hold. But those holds have not increased over the time that we've been watching them in this time period.
Thank you for clarifying, Chief. I apologize for being a bit dim on understanding it earlier. My final, I guess, point is not a question, but really a comment. As some folks know, I am on the board of the Ralston House, and this month is Child Abuse Awareness and Prevention Month. And the Ralston House partners with our police department. So if a child's been a victim of abuse, they can have their forensic interview in a safe home-like setting. And I did learn this last week that they are going to be losing quite a few governmental grants that help them operate. And this is such a key service at this time because, as you can imagine, I think children are incredibly vulnerable, and in some cases now they are stuck at home with their abuser. So I hope anyone listening can take, if they have it in their heart, look into ways to support that organization.
Is that it, Ms. Sykes?
It is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Chief, you have any other items?
No, sir. Thank you for your support.
Okay, council, last time on the chief. Does anyone have any other questions of Chief Carlson before we move on? All right, seeing none. Mr. Tripp, would you like to move to item 5?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Before I do, I'd just like to thank council for your attention tonight. We've been talking, it seems kind of like a little bit nonstop. You've had really good questions, and we hear all your feedback related to those two important subjects of capital prioritization, which I will emphasize, there's not been a decision made to reduce the capital program. We're not there yet. Maybe we'll never get there, but we'd like to be thoughtful about it ahead of time. And we'll use these criteria to provide some ranking. No matter what we come up with, it'll still come back in front of you for ratification. And also, your feedback initially tonight was very helpful too, as we think about how to open safely and provide the highest priority services to folks. So we heard all that. This is a time now for you. If you've got additional questions you might have, I know there were 3 of them that we agendized or at least placed on some notes that I have here. One is a request to talk about engaging in a deeper, broader way with the public on information and what have we maybe learned from this, that longer term we would look at some additional ways, maybe even the utilization of Channel 8. There were comments about the high schools and teachers and that system. I've talked to a couple of you about that. And finally, what can we do to provide financial support or help those folks who are feeding folks for us and providing assistance in our community? So with that, I'll just back off and I'll ask Rich if he wouldn't mind kicking the first one off. Rich Seymour brought that item up. And Rich, do you have anything you'd like to say on that?
Yeah, Don, thank you very much. I brought this issue up and then visited with Don this last week. One of those questions that or thoughts in the back of my mind that Councillor DeMott talks about all the time: what's happened and what are we learning from it? And this may be a situation where long term, using our current situation of trying to figure out how we can best communicate with the absolute most number of residents has brought new things to light. And sometimes those things that are old can be new. And I keep looking at the opportunity that we have with utilizing the Channel 8 through Comcast station. We've talked about this before. We have a population that does not have access to the internet. We're finding out that digital gap right now, but may have other sources or doesn't feel comfortable, know how to use streaming. But our communication inbound from residents has dropped significantly, and I've passionately discussed that in the last few meetings as far as it relates to boards and commission hearings. But this is an opportunity, I think, looking forward. How can we utilize Channel 8 as an outward way to communicate with our residents that fit into that niche? So that's a conversation I'd like to have moving forward. It's not an immediate need. It's not an emergency need, but it's something I'd like to ask my fellow councilors on their thoughts on that as far as we spread out our reach and how we can be more effective moving forward.
Don, I think Councilor Seymour's point is valid. The only thing that I know that we've had an issue with in the past in Channel 8 is unless you are a Comcast subscriber, you do not receive Channel 8. And the last time that we brought this up about expanding that, I think it's been a couple of years now, was at the subscriber level in the city of Westminster to the Channel 8, and what we saw feedback from had been fairly low. And I don't know if we've seen an uptick in that now that with the stay-at-home orders, or if council, not council, but staff has a way of measuring that. if there's that in conjunction with other things that Rich has talked about that would give us more capability of reaching the public, that's something we should look at. But I'd be reluctant to say let's put all of it into Channel 8 when we have so few people in the city the last time this was looked at that subscribe to Comcast. Ms. Smith, you had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And one of the items on the council request was to just put together, work with staff and put together a community message from the council to our graduating seniors, and for those teachers that have had to move their classes online, just kind of a final congrats, you got through it, on to next steps, just kind of words of encouragement in the video, something fairly simple, but I think it's important that we show our support. We would have most likely attended their graduation, so I just wanted to kind of finalize things by encouraging them all and offering them a good luck farewell kind of thing. I also had wanted to bring up with council, I don't see it on our list here, but for looking at on Mondays, we normally have dinner together, and since we haven't been having dinner together, I was hoping that maybe we could talk about using those funds to either donate to a small business or to a nonprofit in Westminster, maybe Growing Home, of maybe using those funds that we aren't using as a council in this time to offer it to back to our community. So those were the two things that I had.
Okay, Mr. DeMott.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow up on Councilor Seymour's point, I mean, in really your points, Mr. Mayor, I understand that viewership's low, and I think it's about covering the spectrum of different people's access, I guess, is the way I look at it. And I know we've done some pretty good live streams, and the city's done a lot of different, a handful of different good live streams, and I appreciate them. And I'm just curious if those were something that we thought about, you know, taking and putting on the different mediums so that that different spectrum of people had access to them. And it's just a thought, and I mean, that could be something for the future, but if, you know, if you have that group of people who do watch Channel 8, I think that would be useful if there is still, you know, viewership there at some level.
So I'm happy to address this. I thought I'd wait to hear the comments. And, you know, Ryan Hagerness is texting me here and anxious to get in and talk about it. But I think what we ought to really do, Ryan and the communications innovation team have done, I would say, a remarkable job of starting to get broader based in the way we communicate. And when Rich and I were speaking, you know, we came to agreement that what we're trying to do here is just really improve everybody's access. And I think Councillor DeMott said it really well. There's just a spectrum and so many different opportunities. I agree with the mayor. You know, the Channel 8 Comcast driven station has very low use right now, but it is a different medium in that it's television in a home that's not internet based. I'll take that back, or I'm going to start to sound ignorant about this whole technology, except to say that whatever's simplest for people coming into their house, and that might be streaming services, it may be traditional television, it may be printed material. I think, you know, you're making a really good point that we need to figure out a way to get to all those audiences in a time like this, that we spend towards a high reliance on digital media. What becomes really stark there is that we're missing some people here. So I think that Ryan and the communication team will take it as a challenge to look at all those opportunities and bring back to you how we can stand a series of things up that'll be hopefully meet those goals you have of getting out to more people from different platforms. Does that help, Council? And Rich, does that capture what you're hoping for here?
Absolutely, Don, and I appreciate that follow-up on that. And Councillor DeMott put it extremely well. It's filling as many niches as we can. People, wide spectrum of age groups, usage groups, and we even talked about, as far as television use itself going down, that people are cutting the wire, so to speak. But we have a population that may be served by that, and we can look at that and get Comcast numbers and see where we can go from there for the future.
Okay,
Don,
good. We'll do that.
Don,
was there another comment?
Yeah, I just would encourage you to get with Ryan and have him look at some specific ways. If there's something that we're not doing to meet the items that the council has raised, to try to encourage that to be included into our platform of ways that we might increase our communication, because we just don't know today how much longer we're going to be in this situation, and until all these new rules get propagated down to where we're going to be and how much longer we're going to be at stay at home. But even if that is returns to some level of normalcy, that communication impact is still going to be there for a long period of time. So anyway, we can increase that. And some of the things that the council's asked about, I know I had responded to Councillor Smith that just donating taxpayer dollars out to groups may not be appropriate legally. We might have a way to do that through our nonprofits and other ways. So we'll have to have the city attorney determine how we could use some city funds that might not be going to a nonprofit or a recognized organization before we can make that commitment. So Mr. Frankel, I asked you to give us some guidance on that and what we can and can't do. And I know that we've still got others who have some questions, but before we go back around again, I think the big thing is we want to try to communicate to the citizens of Westminster as much as we can. Again, we've talked about over communicating is better than under communicating. And especially as we keep seeing these changes come up from the county and the state directors and even the federal government, we want to try to make sure people know as much as we can to make them feel comfortable and safe. Mr. DeMott, you had another question.
Actually, just a comment, Mr. Mayor. One of the other ones that I thought was really useful that I'd be curious about long term, and I know we've talked about like phone dialing out, and I think it sounds like some of that linking these technologies has been problematic. But one of the things that I got on the list for is like Congressman Perlmutter, like every Monday actually, and I usually get the first 10 minutes of it before our meeting, they do the call out if you sign up for it, where they're doing the phone call so that you can join their meetings. I've seen some other elected groups that use that sort of technology. So I think it would be at least worthwhile to look in, again, to cover that spectrum of different users, because especially if it's something that they have the ability to opt into, because to the point the mayor just made, over communicating is better. And I think this is something that we've talked about consistently since I've been on council, to find better ways for people to make sure they're connecting to the information so that they're hearing it at the time that it's happening and not down the road. So just a thought of something else that potentially Ryan and his team might be able to look into.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeMott. Ms. Seitz, you had a comment?
Yeah, Councillor DeMott must have read my mind. I was actually going to ask about the calling before city council meetings out to residents to let them know that they could hop on our virtual meetings and participate. So I think that that's a great idea. Don't know how we fold that in with our existing technology. Perhaps we just give them a phone number, but I think it's something worth exploring. The other thing is that just in regards to Councillor Smith's suggestion, I appreciate that we need to look into it and make sure we're being judicious with the taxpayers' dollars. It does seem like as a city council or as a city, we often buy gift cards that we award to employees during Employee Appreciation Week. I'm wondering if we could use the surplus in council's budget to buy those style gift cards for locally owned restaurants or retailers. I really appreciate the spirit of her suggestion, which is to try to do everything we can to assist these local businesses. And while this isn't a huge amount of money, I think it's a nice symbolic gesture. And again, reminding us to walk the walk.
All right, councilors, any final comments tonight? Mr. DeMott, you want to go one more time?
Yeah, just quick thought, because I also like the intent of what Councillor Smith is suggesting, and I think that's just to give people some accolades that are otherwise not going to be able to celebrate an important milestone, whether that be our high school students or our college students. Maybe it's not necessarily money. I don't know. I've seen different times where we do things at City Hall, and I know that we're kind of limited in what we're doing, but if even something like lighting up the tower and putting it on social media that we're doing it to honor those folks, or I've even seen people doing it with the first responder. So I know that I've seen us do things like that for other situations. So maybe that's something that could be an in-between, because I think that the goal is an admirable one, and that's just to show them that we're thinking of them and kind of their lost situation, really.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Scully?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'd like to follow up on Councillor Smith's idea of the high school recognition as well. First of all, many of our high schools have asked us for $500 for their after prom, which of course was canceled in April, and most of the proms probably won't be rescheduled. But I would like to recommend that we still give them that after prom money to maybe put toward a senior barbecue or something for their senior class. Many of the schools are planning a graduation later in the summer. I know that Jeffco schools are all going to have their graduations over 2 weekends in August. Many of those high schools are planning events around those graduations, like senior barbecues, possible dances, ways to help the seniors celebrate before they head off to their next adventure in life. And then I also really liked the idea of sending a video of the council with parting words, but I would like to extend that to, I had a conversation with a resident this last weekend, and we talked about maybe putting the local high school banners posting them up on the City Hall, maybe showing the colors for the schools on the nights that they would have graduated. For example, Stanley Lake High School was going to graduate on May 14th. We could do blue and green on that night for the lights on the City Hall, and let the schools respectively know that we're doing that, so that if the students want to drive by and look at it, they can do that. So I think there are things that we can do. It would be really nice to help our seniors celebrate. I know that it's only one aspect of our population, but I think that part of bringing a community back together is finding ways and places that we can celebrate, even with social distancing. And this last weekend, many of us stepped outside between 12 and 2 to watch the Thunderbirds fly over. And, at first, when it was first recommended, I thought, oh, that's kind of cool, but, I didn't think of it as really a big deal, but I did step outside to watch it. And when I heard the noise of those planes coming, just a sense of community really rose up in our neighbors. We started all cheering and clapping and screaming, and we watched them fly over, and we were it was a moment of, we're going to be okay. And so I think we need a few more celebrations like that. I know we're in very dark times and things are really hard, but as the saying goes, this too will pass, and we just all have to stay really strong and help each other out. If you have a neighbor that you're worried about, please check on them, offer to bring them groceries, offer to help them connect mentally. Mental health is a huge issue during this time. And if you can financially help a neighbor who maybe has lost their job, is struggling a little, that would be awesome too. Tough times, and we just have to pull together as a community. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Council, for your time tonight. Don, for you and the staff, I appreciate everybody doing this. Ms. Smith, I'm going to go to you for one last comment, and then we're going to close.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We didn't have time to do a roundtable, obviously, since we had Dr. Johnson on, but I just want to take a moment and remember this day for Columbine 21 years ago. It was a horrible day for all of us in that community. So I just wanted to just kind of reference this day in memory of them. And then just a final note to remind residents who live in the Highland Hills District to please vote and return your ballot for Board of Directors. The ballots need to be returned by May 5th.
And a question that Councilor Smith asked earlier today was the continuing support to turn in your information on the 2020 census. Again, that deadline has been extended to October the 31st, but that doesn't mean you need to wait. Those numbers come back to us in federal dollars. So if you can, please remember to get your census documents filled out. Online is very easy. It takes a matter of a few minutes. Council, again, thanks everyone for tonight. Staff, Don, and the group, thank you all for the time you've been putting in, and stay safe. We will see everyone back again next Monday. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.